Today, we're going to trace a massive, 200-year chain reaction. It's an incredible story about how a series of events, starting with just a single invention, ended up leading to 2 world wars, and even the creation of the global system we live in right now. So, let's see how all the pieces connect.
So how on earth could a simple machine, something designed just to spin the thread faster, set off a chain of events that would ignite 2 world wars and completely reshape the globe? It sounds kind of crazy, right? But that is the big question we're tackling today, connecting the dots between technology, empire, and ultimately, global conflict.
We're going to follow this wild chain of dominoes, starting way back in the mid-18th century. We'll see how the Industrial Revolution was the first piece to fall. It knocked over the next one, the Age of Empire, which then crashed into World War I, then World War II, and finally led to the creation of the United Nations.
All right, let's tip over that very first domino. This was a revolution that didn't start on a battlefield with guns and soldiers, but quietly inside a British factory.
You have to remember, before the 1750s, life was overwhelmingly agricultural. It was all about the farm. But then, this wave of new inventions started pulling people away from the fields and into the cities. Wealthy merchants began setting up these huge factories, and it created a whole new way of life and a totally new way of making things.
And what's incredible is how all these innovations created this feedback loop. The spinning jenny made textile production way faster, but it needed power. So along comes James Watt's steam engine to provide that power. But it needed fuel, which created a massive demand for coal and iron. And then, to connect all of it, the mines, the factories, the cities, the steam locomotive arrived and changed the game completely.
And look, Stephenson's rocket here, it wasn't just a train, it was a symbol of this brand new age. For the first time in human history, you could move massive amounts of goods and raw materials with incredible speed. This new mobility became the lifeblood of the entire revolution, wiring the whole system together.
So, let's move to our second domino. All this incredible industrial success in Britain created a new and absolutely massive problem. The factories were always hungry. They constantly needed more raw materials coming in and more people to buy the stuff they were making.
And that hunger has a name: imperialism. To put it simply, this is when a powerful industrialized country goes out and takes control of another, weaker one. And this wasn't just about planting a flag. No, it was about controlling their economy and their resources, all for the benefit of the mother country.
This was really driven by a perfect storm of needs. The factories had an endless appetite for things like cotton and rubber. They also needed brand new markets to sell all the finished goods they were churning out. At the same time, rich investors were looking for new places to put their money to work, and on top of it all, nations were just competing for the sheer pride of having a bigger empire than the next guy.
Now, how do you justify all this? Well, a very powerful ideology emerged. Europeans convinced themselves that they were racially superior, and that it was their moral duty, their so-called burden, to go out and conquer and civilize what they saw as the backward parts of the world. It really provided a moral cover for what was, at its heart, economic exploitation.
And the result of this mindset was just staggering. In a mere 30 years, just one generation, an entire continent was consumed. The scramble for Africa, as it was called, saw European powers literally draw lines on a map, with zero regard for the people actually living there, slicing up the continent's wealth and people among themselves. Of course, this frantic race for colonies couldn't last forever. Eventually, the big industrial nations started running out of new places to conquer, and so their rivalries turned inward, turning on each other. And this is our third domino, the explosion into global war.
By the early 1900s, Europe had become a total powder keg. A complicated system of secret alliances had divided the whole continent into 2 heavily armed camps. On one side, you had the Triple Alliance, led by a newly powerful and really ambitious Germany. And on the other, you had the Triple Entente, which brought together Britain, France, and Russia. Any small spark could now set the entire continent ablaze.
And that spark came on June 28, 1914. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, a guy named Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was assassinated by a Serbian nationalist. Now, this should have been a regional incident, but because of that tangled web of alliances, it was about to become a global catastrophe.
Just look at how fast everything spiraled out of control. Austria, backed by Germany, declares war on Serbia. Russia, which was allied with Serbia, starts to mobilize its army. So Germany then declares war on Russia, and on Russia's ally, France.
Then, when Germany invades neutral Belgium to get to France, Britain declares war on Germany. In just about a week, all the dominoes had fallen, and the Great War had begun.
After 4 long years of unimaginable destruction, World War I finally ended. But the way it ended, the so-called peace that was created, well, that became the 4th domino, setting the stage for an even more destructive war just 2 decades later.
The treaty that was signed at Versailles was supposed to create a lasting, permanent peace. The problem was, the victorious Allies were determined to punish Germany, and the result was a treaty that didn't foster reconciliation. It created a deep, burning resentment that would poison European politics for years.
I mean, the terms were just crushingly severe. Germany was forced to accept all of the blame for the war, pay reparations that would absolutely cripple its economy, basically dismantle its military, and give up every single one of its colonies. For millions of Germans, this wasn't a peace treaty, it was a national humiliation.
Now, a new international organization, the League of Nations, was created to prevent another war. It was such a noble idea. But in reality, it was a toothless tiger. When aggressive countries like Japan and Italy started invading their neighbors in the 1930s, the League was completely powerless to do anything about it.
And this all created the perfect storm. You had the national humiliation from the treaty combined with the devastating Great Depression, and it created fertile ground for extremist politics. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power by promising to tear up that treaty and restore German glory, a path that led the world straight into a second and even deadlier war.
The sheer devastation of World War II is almost unimaginable. And out of those ashes came one final, desperate attempt to stop the dominoes from falling ever again. This is our 5th and final piece in this long chain reaction.
Having witnessed 2 horrific world wars in a single generation, both caused by nationalism and imperial rivalry, the world's leaders knew they had to try something different. The old system had failed, catastrophically. A totally new approach was needed.
And that new approach was the United Nations. Founded in 1945, its mission was crystal clear: to prevent future wars. And it planned to do that by promoting cooperation, developing friendly relations between countries, and upholding universal human rights. It was a direct response to all the failures of the past.
And this brings us right up to our final question. We've followed this incredible chain reaction for 200 years, all the way from a spinning machine in a small English factory to a global assembly in San Francisco, each step logically and tragically leading to the next. The final question for all of us to think about is, has this last step, the creation of a global body, finally been enough to break the chain? Or in some ways, are those dominoes still falling?